think philosophy has to be more public facing. I mean, what we do really matters. Some of what we do is like basic science. It's never going to leave the lab, but some of it has to. I mean, ideas really do change the world.
I can see that you and Barbara already had a good relation before it started, but how is it like collaborating with other computer scientists? Do you see any particular challenges, or do you sometimes see that you are speaking different language or living on a different planet?
Well, it's funny because I knew one computer scientist before that. And I've been really pleasantly surprised. For one thing, we do share some skills and desires, and we're all problem solvers, and we like clear arguments. They tend to want clear answers, right? That's what we're used to, not having clear answers. So that's where the challenge is. But by and large, they really have been open and receptive. I mean, in some cases, we have to help the CS faculty get over the okay, let's just program the rules into the algorithm and then we've got an ethical system. It just doesn't work that way. And the great thing about faculty is they're curious. They're really, really curious. One of our advantages is our engineers and scientists tend to be here because they want to be part of a whole liberal arts institution. I think it could be tougher if you're at a purely tech institution.
That's wonderful. But I think also from looking back, my engineering education, we're always trained to optimize for objective function. Whereas in philosophy, it's really hard to tell what's right from wrong and what's life from dead. So I can imagine that it can be a struggle try to codify some of the thought processes and frameworks taught by philosophers. What have you learned, or what have you kind of realized in working with computer science that's kind of different from your perspective of the world?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, one thing is we don't want to think about codifying. So there's a way in which our goal is a middle ground. Actually, one of my CS colleagues, Stu Schieber, put it really nicely. I don't quite remember what his words were, but he said, what I'm finding really valuable is two things. Just having some of the conceptual resources to articulate the questions, and knowing that there are other people who are trained to think about those questions. So there's a way in which it's not our goal to make computer scientists feel like they have to solve all the problems as they're writing code, but rather we want them to be able to take that hunch, that vague feeling that something's off, and rather than react to it by saying, not my problem, give them the tools to articulate what the worry is and who might it be a worry for and who might it not be a worry for, so that they can then go talk to somebody about it and find somebody that can help them think through it, or maybe they kick it up to the ethics board, but they can actually be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that most of the time engineers have a tendency of trying to find the right answer and just kind of codify it and kind of have it implemented in a black and white manner with no bugs or errors. So I think it's a challenge that if you cannot figure out what is the right answer or what should program or machine do in this particular situation, that can be a big challenge, even if you understand the magnitude of the challenges.
That's true. Here's one thing that you can do, and this is something both philosophers and engineers are used to. Lay down some assumptions. Let's suppose our goal is going to be this, and we're really mostly worried about these users. Then this is what we'll do for such and such reasons. Then you have an explanation for why you wrote the code the way you did, and then say there's a problem. You can still say, well, this is why we did it this way, and we can change the initial assumptions. It's not like we have to keep things fixed forever, and it's not like we're not going to make mistakes.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it almost made me think that engineers should think about not only debugging tool for the functionality of the programs, but also the kind of ethical implications, because the society changes over time and you want to make sure that the assumptions that you made 10 years ago when you're actually implementing the system, if it has changed, the society has evolved, then you want to make sure that you can go back and update some of the parameters so that it can reflect that change. What do you think about the role of philosopher going forward and how you can further contribute to making the better society?
Yeah, so I had a student named Rachel Smith who took my course on a lark. She took my intro philosophy course, and she was a CS concentrator, and she invited me to lunch, and she said, Professor Simmons, I really want to do philosophy, but I want to do it from my generation, and that's a tech generation. And I said, that's exactly what you should do, but it's going to take some bushwhacking because it doesn't exist yet. So you're going to have to try to figure out how to do it. And I was encouraging, and I think she's right. We've got to make philosophy relevant to today. I think philosophy has to be more public facing. I think what we do really matters. Some of what we do is like basic science. It's never going to leave the lab. But some of it has to. Ideas really do change the world. And as you were suggesting, all of our basic concepts right now that we use to think about ourselves are being challenged by technology. What is a person? What is a human organism? What is life? What are emotions? These are all things we're trained to think about. So I've been thinking about this recently, actually. I think philosophers should, if they're able, I'm actually not so good at this, but I have colleagues who are good at writing for a public audience. I think we really need to do that. We should be doing journalism, engaging with journalism. We philosophers have to do the work inside our profession of getting over this idea that we just think the deep thoughts, in our silo. But most of my colleagues have this broader vision, and I think the younger generation does too. So I'm really hopeful. When we were talking at one point, and you mentioned various devices that have been created that elicit emotional responses in people. You can imagine in one culture, eliciting an emotional response is a really good thing. In another culture, it may not be, and it may bring shame or something. You want to be aware of that, be able to change things up. Yeah.
Not only that, I think it's more challenging because it's really hard to tell what is appropriate and right, even in one single culture. And I think one of the examples that we talked about was the artificial beings that portray certain kind of level of personality and emotion. And granted, whether a machine can have emotion and personality is a whole another question. If you, from the user perspective, just because those services or artificial being portray some kind of emotional empathy, that user develops further trust and belief, and businesses exploit that trust to sell more services, right? Some people can view it as exploitation. Some people say it's kind of effective marketing, and there is no real kind of right black and white cut in doing such a things. And I think as a society, we should have a perspective tell what can eventually be harmful if that trend continues in that direction so much more. And it seems like a very complicated question to answer.
It's very complicated, but that's why everybody has to be part of the conversation, including the people writing the code. That's why I would like them to have the conceptual tools, because they know what's possible and what's not possible. And, ideally philosophers are part of the conversation, government's part of that conversation, users are part of the conversation. They really need to be part of the conversation too. And it's not going to be easy. Tech isn't something that lives in a silo with you. It's part of all of our lives. It's mediating everything we do. So we have to have a societal conversation about it.
Do we believe that the AI that can generate poem is fundamentally different from us who can feel and see and come up with a poem? What troubles us here is that there is no clear consensus about what makes humans so special.